Hello and welcome to the very first Neuly Exchange. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really pleased to have you here. Before we begin, we just wanted to explain a little bit about what Neuly Exchange is all about. This is not a webinar led by clinical experts or professionals telling you what you should do. We're definitely not here because we have all the answers. What we are parents and carers, and between us, we have more than 20 years of lived experience raising neurodivergent children. Alongside that, for the past decade, we've been running an organisation supporting families whose children are neurodivergent or have mental health needs. And over those years, we have listened to thousands of families and shared in their journeys and learned a huge amount, not just from our own experiences, but from the experiences of others too. And so we wanted Neuly Exchange to be something a little bit different. Rather than another session full of strategies or a list of things to try, we wanted just to try and create a space for honest conversation, a place to reflect on what life is really like, to explore the challenges and the successes, and to share some of the lessons, ideas, and practical tips that have genuinely helped us along the way. Some of what we talk about today may resonate with you, some of it may not, and that's absolutely fine. We know that every child and every family and every journey is different. Our hope is simply that you leave with something that makes life feel a little bit easier, whether that's a new perspective, a practical idea, or simply the reassurance that you're not alone. So, to introduce ourselves, I'm Jill, and I'll let Angie introduce herself.
Hi there, everybody. My name's Angie.
We've known each other for a very long time now. And
Yeah,
if
can't see the grey hairs. Yeah.
yes, that's exactly it. Thank goodness for hair dye. And we have become, we work together, but also we've become more than friends, family in our experiences together. So yeah, thanks for joining us. So let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be thinking about those questions you have really early on about whether your child could be neurodivergent. And often from that very beginning of that journey isn't one big moment, although we know for some families, obviously, it's very clear very early on. But for many parents and carers, it starts with lots of little things, just that feeling that something is different, maybe everyday things that seem harder than you expected. And maybe you notice that your child reacts differently to certain situations. Or you might find yourself wondering why something that seems easy for other children feels really difficult for your child. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. It just means that you're noticing and trying to understand your child, doesn't it?
It all does. And thinking back, what do you think are the first things that parents might notice when they start wondering if their child could be neurodivergent?
Oh, it's so hard, I think, when you're a parent yourself, when you're in it and you're living it. It's just like you're normal, isn't it? You're not kind of, particularly if it's your first child, you're not looking and comparing so much. And that was certainly my experience of kind of being completely unaware. But we know that for every child it's different. But there are things that you might notice if you start sort of focusing a little bit more closely, you might notice things like those emotions, big feelings that feel really hard to manage for your child, having meltdowns or shutdowns and taking longer than you might expect to recover from those really difficult moments. Could be around communication, whether your child finds it hard to explain feelings or needs, whether there are differences in conversations or interactions than you might have with other children of the same age. They might take things very literally, or they might find communicating at all really, really difficult. Could also be issues with sensory experiences, sounds, lights, smells, clothing, food, or just feeling really overwhelmed by those things. Or they might be a child that's sensory seeking, so they want lots of movement and pressure and sensory input. They might also find things difficult with changes and routines. So, any transitions from one thing to another could be really challenging. They might really need that predictability, or they might struggle when plans change. And they might be a child that holds everything all together throughout the day, and then they get home and everything can fall apart. And they just might feel completely exhausted by things that other children of the same age seem to manage really easily. But alongside that, they might have some amazing strengths. They could have these really deep interests or creativity. They might have an amazing memory. Honestly, my son can remember things that I have no idea how he remembers every detail of every train car, and everything that happened on the Titanic. Or they might have real attention to detail or just a different way of looking at things, which I think can be amazing. But it is a huge amount to be looking out for, isn't it?
It is, but I think you're right in what you said earlier on in that bit. Your child is your child, and you're just used to your child, being your child. What they are. I think for my daughter, it was always she had a cracking sense of humour, but it was a very quirky sense of humour. So to us, that was just her. But it is a lot to be looking out for. How do you think parents know the difference between a child having sort of like the difficult stage that children have, and if it's something more?
Yeah, I think it's really hard, isn't it? But I guess that's when, as a parent, you start looking for patterns. All children have hard days, we know that. But if you start looking at how often is that happening, how intense is it, how much is it affecting everyday life? Is your child having to work much harder just to cope with things than other children of the same age? And are you having to adapt things? And I think we did that without even realizing we were adapting things. You make all these changes and it's just normal and it's part of everyday life. But if you can stop and kind of have a look at that and realize that it's not about sort of one behavior, it's about looking at the whole picture and knowing that when they're 3 or 4, sometimes it can be really difficult to tell whether you're going down that path of sort of perhaps neurodivergence or autism, or it's just part of their development. And I definitely felt that with my eldest when she was sort of 3 and 4. I thought she was going to, she had signs of autism. Funnily enough, I didn't think that for her brother. But actually, she grew past that stage and then is neurotypical now. So it is sometimes about waiting and just watching, I think.
Think you're right, and I think we also do as parents. We naturally adapt to the needs of our children. I think that's just a natural process of being a parent. So I think that's okay too. It's as you say, it's like splitting that out into finding the little things, the little patterns. Do you think parents sometimes feel guilty for even wondering if their child could be neurodivergent?
Oh, definitely, particularly if in your family and where you grew up, there are particular views on autism or ADHD. And I think with that, that's one pressure, but actually, I think parents struggle as well. You start to think, am I doing the right thing? Am I focusing just on what's difficult? But I think it's really important to remember that just because you're wondering about it doesn't mean you're looking for something to be wrong. You're just trying to understand your child better. And that's really important. If you ever get a diagnosis, that doesn't change who your child is, but it gives you more information about how you can support them. And I think that's what the whole idea is, isn't it? As parents, we beat ourselves up all the time over every
We
tiny
we
decision.
do. We certainly do, and we doubt ourselves, and we think, should we have done it this way? Should we have done it that way? I still think that now.
Yeah,
But you're right. It just helps you able to support them in the way that they might need.
yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? For sure. Okay. So if we look at the next slide, we know that one of the most difficult parts of the early stages is when your experience of your child doesn't seem to match what other people are seeing. And I say this with a smile because this was a big experience, I know, for both of us with our children. We might hear that, oh, but they're fine in school. Definitely heard that. They don't behave like that here. Definitely heard that with family. That everyone struggles sometimes, which just used to drive me mad, but you know. Um, or the classic, they just need clearer boundaries. If you manage their behavior better, then everything would be okay. Definitely heard that one too. And I know that for some of those comments, they are meant to reassure us as parents, but actually they leave us feeling really dismissed or questioning our own judgment. And the reality is that children respond differently depending on the environment that they're in and the demands placed upon them. So a child who appears to be coping is not always coping comfortably, are they?
I think it's that's a real common experience for families, particularly when home and school are seeing two very different versions of the same child, and you sort of like think, oh, why can't you see what I see at home? Why can't you see this? Why can't you believe me almost that this is
Yeah.
this is what's happening, sort of thing. How do parents make sense of that without feeling like they're constantly trying to prove their concerns over and over again?
It is really hard. You feel completely judged, don't you, if people
You
don't believe
do,
you and
you do.
support you. and then, well, personally become quite defensive in that, and it it can take over everything. And actually, the idea is to try and move away from that somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong. Because school might see a child who's meeting expectations and following routines and managing the day, but then we see when they get home the impact of how much effort that's taken. We see them coming home, they explode the moment they get out of the school gate, or they are completely exhausted as soon as they get home. They have that increased need for control and predictability at home, or you can see how anxious they are just trying to get them into school. Um, and they need a lot of time to recover. And so that wider picture is really important. Just because schools think they're okay doesn't mean that they necessarily are.
It's also sort of difficult when family or friends are trying to reassure you, isn't it? But it leaves you feeling sort of like more alone. How do you think parents balance listening to others while still trusting what they are noticing?
I find it really hard. I
Yeah,
think
me
I do.
too.
I just feel like if you don't believe me and you can't support me, then I don't know. I find
Mm.
that really challenging, even now. And, it's 14 years since my son was diagnosed, and gosh, what, 6 years since my daughter was, and I still find that really hard. But I think when I'm trying to be all zen and very calm about it, what I try to do is think that other people's perspectives can actually be really valuable, but knowing that they only see one part of your child and one part of the picture. Grandparents and friends and relatives might see your child for a much shorter time, in a more familiar setting where the demands are different. And frankly, if they're grandparents, if you're lucky enough to have grandparents in your life, they're often spoiled, they get what they want, everything is lovely, and all their needs are met, you know. And so, of course, they're going to behave in a particular way. And so, rather than trying to collect evidence to prove that they're wrong when they say, oh, they seem fine here,
Mm.
actually, what you've got to try and think about is where does your child thrive? Where do they struggle? What changes between those environments and what support helps them succeed? I think when I'm at a family dinner, they say to me, very well meaning, but they'll say, "Oh, they're doing really well, aren't they? They're great. Look, they're great here today." And my standard response is thank you. Yeah, it took us 2 weeks to prepare to be here today, and we have a plan if it doesn't work out. But thank you for recognizing all the work I put into it. I think I've become very passive aggressive, which is not
Yeah,
necessarily a
but
strength.
sometimes you do what helps you as well, don't you? Because it's very exhausting, this journey. It can be,
Yeah.
So you do what helps you. I remember one Christmas, we wrote a letter, excuse me, to family saying this is what actually I need. I need to be able to go out if things are going wrong for me, sort of thing, so that they knew what was needed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I used to put things on Facebook, videos about autism just before Christmas and be like, if we're coming this week, you might want to watch this. Although the reality is that often we didn't stay for long and it was all managed in a particular way. But yeah, it does become really hard. I think what we've got to try and do is focus on understanding needs, not winning an argument, which is really easy to say and really hard to do. But we know that this time when other people aren't necessarily seeing what you're seeing can be incredibly lonely, because you see it. And I think that really takes its toll on us as parents and carers. And so I think it's worth just being aware of that. Pick your battles. Not everybody has to see it the way that you see it. They all see your child in different situations. And if you can make peace with that, and that's something I'm trying to do still, then that just makes life easier for you as a parent. It's not worth that battle. You've got enough battles to have, haven't you?
For sure.
Okay. So we move on to the next slide and have a think about one of the hardest things about this stage at the very, very start of this journey is perhaps not knowing what to do with all the thoughts that you're having. You might not feel ready to talk about an assessment or a diagnosis, and you might not even know that's the route you want to go down, and that's absolutely fine. But what you can do is start understanding your child better now, can't you?
You can. I think for me, this and for quite a few other parents that we've supported, this is a stage where it can feel like really overwhelming for you, and that those thoughts and feelings that you've got coming in, you don't want to ignore what you're noticing, but you also don't want to jump ahead and make assumptions that what you're seeing is this, that, or the other. It's a really hard stage.
It is. It's exactly that. So I think it's good to remind ourselves it doesn't have to start with a diagnosis. Just start with what helps. Let's break it down. constantly trying to break things down into manageable steps. So you could write down what you notice. You could keep conversations with school, have notes about what's said, think about what makes everyday life easier or harder, and learn from trusted information sources. Be really mindful of where you're finding your information from. Talk to people who understand autism and ADHD. Ask your child about their experiences if you can and if they're willing to talk to you about it. And importantly, just start making those little adjustments. You don't need permission to make life easier for your child. You can just get on with it. You don't have to wait. I think that's really
And
important.
ultimately, making things easier for your child helps support them, but it helps you support them as well. It helps you too. It's a two-way process, isn't it? I think though that lots of parents do seem to worry about changing things means they're giving in, or and as you see on social media all the time, you're not preparing their child for for your child for the real world. What do you think about that?
I have lots of views about that. Um,
Mm.
I think, and I know it comes up a lot, but it is not about giving them support. It's not going to remove every challenge that they have. It's about understanding what helps your child manage those challenges. We all use adjustments. We wear glasses, we choose environments that work for us, and our children are no different. We're not trying to give them advantages, we're trying to level it up a bit. It's why the Equal Opportunities Act exists in the UK, to make things equal. And sometimes, our children need those adjustments to give them that equal chance in life. So I have
I
no
think
qualms about that.
I think that's a real I think that's a really good point to make that, actually we all do it naturally in our lives. I write things down on paper and notebooks and that because that's the way that works for me, and I make that adjustment for myself. So and that's okay. But I don't think of it as making an adjustment, just that's what works for me. I do it that way. I think that's if you can frame it that way as well, for your child, I think that will help.
Yeah. And if other people don't get that, then perhaps they're not the people to be around your child. We had that with school literally in the last year. Um, we were told some teachers don't believe in reasonable adjustments because that doesn't prepare your child for the real world. It's at secondary school. And my child is no longer at that school because I just thought, okay, that I'm banging my head against a brick wall here. Let's just
Yeah.
move on. This is sometimes you
Yeah,
have
and
to make,
the world today is full of people making adjustments for themselves and that to what they need. We're human beings. We do that naturally anyway.
yeah. And the
So
world,
what? It's not wrong.
it feels almost kinder now, the world. And
Definitely.
the pros and cons of social media, but it does help people understand the needs and be more
Yeah.
willing. I feel like, and not for, in every circumstance, obviously, but I feel like the world is more understanding now of autism and of ADHD than it ever has been. And I hope that will only improve.
Because it's more open and out there, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
more available in everybody's sort of like everyday language and things like where perhaps it wasn't sort of like, 15 years ago.
yeah, exactly that. So, yeah, I think keep making those reasonable adjustments. Your children need it, they need to know it's their right to have that as they get older. It's part of life. Okay, so if you are in that phase, if we go back to that kind of beginning questioning whether or not your child might be neurodiverse, I think once you start wondering whether they might need more support, it can be really hard to know what to do next or who to speak to. And it's also important to know that getting answers can take time. If you do go down the assessment route, waiting lists can be really, really long. I mean, we're talking years. And what happens next can look really different depending on where you live and what support pathways there are locally to you. But that doesn't mean you just wait. There are things you can start doing straight away, aren't there?
There are, but I think that waiting period is certainly something that I didn't expect. I thought that, it would, everything once I reached out for support, everything would be there quite naively, and it's really hard and something families don't always expect. When you finally decide to ask for help, you almost imagine that that's when everything starts moving, but actually, realistically, it can be just the start at the beginning of another wait.
It can, and that's so challenging for us as parents, especially if things aren't going well at school or in other places to get that help. And I think that's why, when we're working with families, we tell them to capture information as early as you can, keep a record of everything, so that when you speak to professionals, they might, if you're going for an assessment, they'll want to know what made you seek advice now. When did you first notice differences? What are your main concerns? How does it affect everyday life? What have you tried? What helped? What didn't help? And actually, to have all of that information in your brain in a one quick meeting, it's a complete overload. Yeah, you can't remember any of it. My mind just goes blank. But actually, when you're living it day to day, it can actually be really important to keep notes on everything because you're just not going to remember. I definitely don't remember, I used to keep notes on my phone, I still do, putting things down as they happen just so that I can remember them. Um, because you think you're going to remember, but you really rarely do. And actually, this is one of the reasons that we are involved in Neuly, because now Neuly is there. You can literally type it into WhatsApp and it'll upload it to your profile, or you can go onto the website and type these things in, and it keeps a record of everything that you're going through. And then you can download a one page that you can take to appointments, and it's all there for you, which is pretty amazing, I think.
It is. I would certainly have used it. And I think that I was quite guilty of going along to appointments and meetings sometimes and just not being able to remember, then coming out and kicking myself, thinking, oh, why didn't I remember to say that? Why didn't I? Why didn't I knew I needed to say that. Why didn't I?
I know. Yeah,
It is, yeah,
I was going to say, I remember texting my mum in a meeting because they were asking something about, if my son had done something when he was 3, and that was only 3 years like earlier because he was 6 at his assessment, and I was like, I have no idea, but my mum will remember. And so I was
yeah,
texting her saying, did he do this? Because they wanted examples of what actually happened.
yes.
It wasn't just you can say, yes, he did that. They want an example. And I found that so hard. So actually preparing for that in advance. And we know that's something that's being built into Newly because we asked for it, helping prepare in advance for these kind of things, assessments and meetings, so that you go in ready to go and you don't have to come out kicking yourself and then panicking because you want to update them with the tiny thing that you forgot that probably wouldn't make any difference, but
No,
it
no.
becomes the most important thing in the world, doesn't it? If you leave that meeting and you've remembered something, you suddenly have to tell them, and that stress
It
just
does.
rises.
It does. I can remember sending email after email afterwards saying, I forgot to say this, I forgot to say that.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you think that whilst families are waiting, is there anything they can actually do rather than just waiting for someone else to tell them what happens next?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. You can start looking about what support there might be for your child and how you can support them. Look out for that trusted information. Start thinking about strategies. Obviously, another thing that Newly is brilliant at. But you can look at, are there changes you can make in the morning to make it a little bit easier? What would help support transitions? Are sensory needs having an impact? Are there things you can do around, the touch, the smell, the taste, the food? All of those areas, or is it having a routine or a visual support that might be more helpful? Are there changes at home or school that might reduce stress? Sometimes professionals will ask what support has already been tried. So if you're keeping track of that, that's really, really useful. And again, I keep referring to Newly, obviously, but it can help with that. It will give you those strategies. You can review it with Newly and it will bring it all together in one easy, accessible place. So, think about, what did you try? Did it help? Did it change anything? And it's not about trying to fix our children, it's about understanding what helps them. And I think that's crucial.
Yeah, definitely. Who do you think parents should speak to first?
I think it depends on what you're noticing and obviously the age of your child, but school or nursery, speak to their class teacher, to a key worker or to the Senko. If you've got a health visitor, if they're a little bit younger, or a GP, it's a good place to start, particularly if you've got wider concerns around well-being or development, sleep or anxiety, or any other health needs. And remember, you can ask questions before you're certain. You don't need a diagnosis to start understanding your child. So don't be afraid to get out there and start asking for the professionals' opinions on things. I think that's really important. Okay, so one thing that often happens for so many parents and carers at this stage is that you start wondering and then naturally you start looking for information. And suddenly there is a whole world you didn't even know existed. So you might be reading about autism and ADHD. You might be learning about sensory differences, masking, school support, different approaches, people's lived experience. It's like you discover a whole new language and new ideas and different ways of understanding your child. And for some families, that can bring huge relief. You know, you find people who actually get it, and you read someone else's story and you think that's exactly what we're experiencing. And I think, at the heart of that is realizing that you're not the only family navigating this. And that connection can be really powerful. But we also know that for some families, that can be really overwhelming when you start reading stories about other people's challenges, the struggles with the system, or the difficult experiences. And then that just increases your worry about, your child's future. But it is really important just to remember that everybody's journey is different. Just because one person really struggled and their child had a really negative experience doesn't mean yours will as well. So it is about kind of remembering that, I think, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it's about picking out from those stories and books and information that you're reading what is relevant and not letting everything sort of like bog you down. And people that have been doing this for years and years and years will obviously have a different story and a different experience, than you. But if you can just pick out the little bits that sort of like help you and your family and relate to you and your family, I think it'll be a sort of like a calmer sort of like understanding of that information that you're getting. And I think it's something that many parents will recognize. You start off going out and looking for reassurance or answers, but there's so much information and so many experiences that it becomes a lot to process.
Oh, it really does. Once you start learning, it can feel like there's an expectation that you need to know everything, every term, every strategy, every bit of research, but you don't. And I definitely hold my hands up for that. I don't know everything. I find it really too much when I'm living it all day, every day, and all night, every night. I need to slow it down. I can't cope with that much information. Um, but I know some people find it really helpful to do a really deep dive on things. They want to read as much as they can, and that's totally fine. I think it's all about kind of knowing yourself and knowing what's right for you. There is no pressure to do everything, to attend every course, to read every book. I think just, live your life and make it work for you. Because if you don't read everything, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're not supporting your child. It's your child, your family, and your journey. And the important thing is finding what helps you understand them and how you can best support them.
Absolutely. You can do what is right for you. And if you don't understand acronyms that people are telling
Oh my
you, then
goodness. Yeah.
ask, if you get a letter full of, little letters, I can't remember how many little letters there are after like, my child's different diagnoses and things. But yeah, if you don't understand, ask, but you don't have to know everything. It's okay to ask, you know.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I think there's an emotional side to learning more as well, because sometimes when things start to make sense, you find yourself looking back at things differently and thinking, oh, that's why that happened. That's why we did that. That's why that didn't work.
Oh yeah, it happens a lot, doesn't it? Um, you start replaying all the situations and thinking about the moments that we didn't understand our child at that time, and and that's a dangerous kind of wormhole, is it, to go down?
Mm.
It's not about looking backwards and blaming yourself. We made the decisions we did with the information we had at the time. And I think now, as you learn more, you have more information, and then you can start moving forwards and understanding your child better. And I'm still doing that now. My middle one's 22, my youngest is 14, and I'm still learning about how to support them. And I think as long as you keep open to that and you keep learning and adjusting and you change as they change, that's a crucial thing. And you've got to take what helps and leave what doesn't. And I think just remember, we're learning alongside our children. We don't have to be perfect. It's just about keep trying to get it right. Otherwise, you put so much pressure on yourself, don't you?
Yeah, you do, and know that something that worked, a while ago might not work now. You might have to change things up.
Something
It's
that
that
worked a
constant
day ago.
adapting. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But it's keeping you on your toes, sort of thing. But you can just adapt things around, thinking, okay, but you then just let it go. Okay, that used to work, it doesn't now, so now we need to do it this way.
Exactly. And there are places such as Neuly where it can help you find those new strategies, figure out new ways to update things, to change things. Yeah, for sure. It is about keep learning. So if there's one thing to take away from today, I think it's not to be afraid of noticing. We know that sometimes parents and carers worry that by asking questions, it feels like they're looking for something to be wrong. But actually, noticing differences is not about changing your child, and it's more about understanding them. You don't need to have all the answers straight away. You don't need to know exactly where this journey is going to lead you, but it's about starting by being curious. What helps your child? What makes things harder? What do they need the people around them to understand? And remember that whatever happens next, your child is still your child. That doesn't change, does it?
No, and I think that is a really important message because so many of us put parents on ourselves to get everything right immediately, but know that what today is still the same child that you had yesterday and before that. I think that's really important to keep in your mind.
Yeah, for sure. You don't have to work everything out overnight. Find the good information, find people who understand, speak to those people around your child, and take it one step at a time. The aim was never to find a diagnosis, the aim is always about better understanding our children. And if we keep that in mind, it makes this journey just a little bit more manageable, I think.
So,
For sure. Okay, right. There you go. That brings us to the end of our first Neuly Exchange. Thank you for joining us. We hope you found something helpful in it, whether that's a practical idea or just knowing that you're not going through this on your own. We've been there. Thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of families have been through exactly the same journey and the same challenges. And, at Newly, we're all about supporting families through every stage of their journey. There isn't a one size fits all approach to raising a neurodivergent child, and none of us gets things right all the time. And what we do know is that sharing experiences can just make this journey feel a little bit less overwhelming. So, next time, we're going to be talking about after an assessment. We know that for many families, getting to the assessment is only a tiny part of the journey. So, we'll look at what happens next, making sense of things, managing expectations, and finding our feet after the assessment process. So we hope that you will join us again. And thank you very much for being part of our first ever Neuly Exchange.